Sean, we support Secretary Noem. We support our men and women of Homeland Security and ICE who are out there taking predators off the street every day around the country, and they're doing it in Minnesota. What happened in Minnesota? We had 6 prosecutors who suddenly decided they didn't want to support the men and women in ICE. One of them was busy doing a photo shoot with the New York Times while ICE was out there risking their lives. So they came, they said, we want to resign, but we want to use our annual leave up until April, meaning they wanted the taxpayers to pay for them to go on vacation because they decided they didn't want to support law enforcement. So the breaking news tonight, I fired them all. They're fired from the office. And our U.S. attorney there, Rosen, he's great. He was just confirmed 3 months ago. So he has his hands full. And that's what we're facing around the country, the deep state, in many of these offices. And we learned these people had been out there interviewing at liberal law firms prior to this. But I'll tell you what, from a personnel level, they'd be an HR nightmare. So people better look into them. One of them actually in 2022 defended BLM when they burned down a pawn shop and someone was murdered. Yeah, they want to be part of the resistance. Yeah, bring it on. They're not going to be working for Donald Trump and the Department of Justice any longer. But that's what we're up against, not only in Minnesota, but around this country.
That's almost impossible to comprehend, but nothing surprises me anymore. All right, Attorney General Pam. Yeah, go ahead.
And Sean, also, we had our great men and women in the U.S. Attorney's Office in California, in Eastern Michigan say, we'll come in, we'll prosecute those cases. So get ready. Good riddance to the 6 that are gone. Our great other prosecutors from around the country are coming in to protect the men and women of ICE.
At 4:21 a.m., the city was still asleep. Winter had sealed the streets in silence, freezing parked cars into place beneath a thin layer of ice. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, nothing to announce what was coming. Only a line of unmarked vehicles moved slowly through the darkness, turning onto a quiet block where most residents believed nothing truly bad could ever happen. At the end of that street stood a modest office building, familiar to many, trusted by nearly all. By sunrise, that trust would no longer exist. For years, Adam Noor had been regarded as a steady presence, a figure who spoke the language of reassurance. At public gatherings, he talked about safety, opportunity, and responsibility. His office walls were lined with framed certificates, photos of smiling volunteers, and slogans about community development. Parents brought concerns to him. Elders shook his hand. Donations were made, not out of obligation, but belief. He appeared to embody stability, the kind of leadership people wanted to believe was immune to corruption. That belief would become the foundation of everything that followed. When federal agents reached the entrance, they moved without hesitation. A heavy tool struck the door once, then again. On the third impact, the frame split and gave way. Inside, flashlights swept across desks and filing cabinets, over neatly stacked folders and official-looking documents. At first glance, it looked exactly as expected. An ordinary office doing ordinary work. Then a panel behind the main desk shifted. Hidden behind the false wall were 23 sealed bricks, tightly wrapped and marked with symbols that required no explanation. This was not the kind of discovery associated with personal failure or momentary temptation. This was inventory. Nearby, a steel safe bolted directly into the floor resisted opening until specialized tools forced it apart. Inside sat $4.7 million in cash, stacked carefully, banded, and organized with a precision that suggested routine rather than panic. On the desk itself lay a secure communication device, still active. Its screen pulsed faintly, displaying encrypted instructions that traced financial movements far beyond the city limits. At that moment, investigators understood that this office was not symbolic. It was functional. It was a node. As the evidence was cataloged, a larger picture began to take shape. Paper trails revealed shell companies, consulting agreements, and development grants approved with unusual speed. Some authorizations had been signed in minutes, others late at night, when oversight was weakest and questions were unlikely. On paper, everything appeared lawful. In practice, it was seamless. This was not a mistake. It was a system. Over time, legitimate language had been repurposed to disguise extraordinary movement of money. Community programs, outreach initiatives, security assessments, each label sounded harmless, even admirable. But the numbers told a different story. Transfers repeated themselves with mechanical regularity. Fees appeared without corresponding services. Warehouses changed ownership quietly, always at the right moment. Shipments arrived on schedule, labeled as supplies, inspected briefly, then waved through. Surveillance footage showed meetings that were short and deliberate. Basements, storage units, unremarkable locations chosen precisely because they drew no attention. Multiple phones were used, each assigned a single function, each discarded when its usefulness ended. No speeches were given in those rooms, no promises were made, only approvals. What became increasingly clear was that the network had not been imposed from the outside. It had been built from within. Every step required a signature. Every shipment required a permit. Every transaction depended on someone deciding not to ask why. The response came just before dawn. It was designated Operation First Light. Multiple locations were approached at the same time, preventing warnings from spreading. Gates were forced open. Side doors were breached. Inside one facility, agents discovered stainless steel tanks, conveyor systems, reinforced rooms, and layers of security more commonly associated with industrial operations than neighborhood businesses. This was not street-level crime. It was infrastructure. When the final door was opened and the last room cleared, the illusion collapsed entirely. What had been presented for years as progress and protection was, in reality, a carefully concealed pipeline operating in plain sight. By morning, the city looked unchanged. The streets filled as they always did. Coffee shops opened, newspapers were delivered, but conversations were quieter. People lingered over headlines longer than usual. A retired volunteer stared at a photograph and whispered that she used to help there. It wasn't anger that spread first. It was disbelief. Betrayal doesn't only damage institutions. It damages memory. It forces people to reconsider moments they once viewed as positive, to question whether trust itself had been misplaced. The raids ended. Investigations continued. Courtrooms would eventually fill with arguments and evidence. But long after the vehicles left and the tape was removed, the deeper question remained. If those entrusted to protect and represent can quietly build something like this, not hidden in shadows, but embedded within everyday systems, then where does accountability truly begin? Danger never disappears entirely, but neither does awareness, and sometimes the most important outcome of a collapse is not what is exposed, but what people learn to look for next time.